Patriot University offers almost no science courses at all. The Bible and science, creation and the collapse of evolution, medical science and the Bible, the biblical basis of modern science, and a health, nutrition, and first aid course. But that's about it. And in order to matriculate at Patriot University, one sends in love offerings. I can imagine what kind of grades you get if you send in love offerings every month, and I sure wish I'd been able to pay my tuition that way. Patriot University is located in a house in Alamosa, Colorado. It used to be located in a house in Colorado Springs, and there is no outward evidence that this house is Patriot University. A website run by Christians who evaluate Christian distance learning centers calls PU a diploma mill. So am I being elitist and snooty here? Well, no more than the rest of you. All of you have turned to professionals for medical or mechanical advice, and you assume a level of professional expertise. If you have a broken leg, do you want to get a doctor who graduated from U of I or one who learned medicine on his own? If you have a union card, did you get that by an apprenticeship or by workbooks and home study? Science is no different, and the practitioners of science also need to have a certain level of expertise, and this is most easily achieved by studying science at a university. Well, Hovind will now whine ad hominem or something like that. I'm not attacking him for his religious beliefs. It's the lousy science I'm after.
Karen Bartelt here is using an ad hominem argument, attacking me personally. Whether I have a degree or not is not the issue. Where my degree is from is not the issue. What am I saying is the issue. The university she teaches at is a small college in Eureka, Illinois. I grew up not very far from that area. I'm very familiar with that region. And when President Reagan was there, it was a very, very small college, and yet their claim to fame is that it's the college of President Reagan. The size of the college doesn't matter. Darwin's degree was in theology, and yet I'm sure Karen Bartelt and many others think of him as being a great scientist. So to attack the college is simply not a valid argument. By the way, my degree is a PhD, Doctor of Philosophy in Education, and we'll show you a picture of that.
I'm sick of these archaic arguments being trotted out as proofs of a young earth or evidence against evolution. And if an atheist like Richard Dawkins went off the deep end and started spouting this stuff, I would be happy to come up here and slug it out with him. So let the questions begin. I'm ready.
To be here today, and I do count it a great joy to be able to defend the biblical worldview against anybody, regardless of what they stand for, and I do appreciate y'all coming. My name is Kent Hovind. I did teach high school science 15 years. My degree is from Patriot University, a small non-accredited school, so this really ought to be very easy for Dr. Bartelt to show how foolish I am in my scientific statements that I make. I mean, it should be a no contest thing, a David versus Goliath, and I'm happy to be here on those conditions. Let's talk about the geologic column. This was our first question. There's too many questions for me to answer in my 15 minutes, but we've got 2 hours over the day. We'll try to cover all this. In the early 1700s, or in the late 1700s, most people thought the Earth was about 6,000 years old. That was called the paradigm, the accepted worldview. That was standard procedures from a textbook here. Along came James Hovind, who said he thinks the Earth is much older than that. And he wrote a book on that in 1795. James Hutton developed the idea that later came to be known as uniformitarianism. And the catchphrase there is, the present is the key to the past. Now, James Hutton's work had a very profound influence on a guy named Sir Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell was a lawyer from Scotland who, in 1830, wrote this book, Principles of Geology. In this book, building on the work of Stratus Smith and Cuvier and some other guys, and she mentioned some, I didn't get a chance to write them all down. Smith, I think, was the one you mentioned, who were creationists. There's no question. But Cuvier and some of these other guys, and Charles Lyell, over the early 1800s, developed the geologic column. Lyell's hatred for the Bible shows up on many pages in his book. I won't take time to go through all that, but he really did not like Scripture for all sorts of reasons. He talked about men of superior talent, he's referring to himself, who thought for themselves. In other words, you know, if you believe the Bible, you're dumb, and basically the attitude is, we're smart, you're dumb. I run into this all the time, and we'll take care of that today. But so they're blinded by authority, like the Bible. About 1830, Charles Lyell and some other guys developed a stratigraphic technique for dating Cenozoic deposits based on relative proportions of living and extinct species of fossil mollusks. They did this they made this stratigraphy based upon the fossils they contained. This is from, you can write the reference down there if you like, as far as help, and check that out. Geology Magazine. So it was Lyell. One of the questions you asked about Lyell, at least in the letter to me, was, how was Lyell involved in this developing of the geologic column? He was certainly involved in this developing of the geologic column. This is typical textbook propaganda showing the geologic column in this particular order. They have these different rock layers named, like for instance, maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park. The Jurassic layers, representing this right here, in the early 1800s, each of the layers of the Earth was given a name, an age, and an index fossil. And it was done, as you saw from the previous quote, based largely, with a large section of it at least, based upon marine fossils. Because the largest percentage of the fossils found are marine fossils. The geologic column is the Bible to the evolutionist, and it can only be found in the textbooks, and I'll stand by my statement. If there were a column of sediments, unfortunately no such column exists. Now the 26 places she referred to, which I'll be glad to work on referencing that, but let me show you how they tell the name of the strata that they're going to call it. That'll make a lot of sense to you of why they say they've been able to find 26 places. The Grand Canyon, for instance, has thousands of layers of sediment. They try to teach that each of these layers was laid down slowly over millions and millions of years, and the Grand Canyon represents millions of years of stratification and then subsequent erosion. What they don't tell you is, each of these layers of rock are stacked on top of each other like pancakes, and if they sat there for millions of years exposed, one of these intermediate ones would have some tremendous erosion marks in it. All of them should have all sorts of erosion marks in it. The Grand Canyon shows classic evidence of how these deposits were laid down very rapidly, probably within a few weeks or months of each other. Certainly not millions of years between the layers being laid down. Secondly, the top of Grand Canyon is about a mile higher than the top of Grand Canyon. The river only runs through the bottom of the canyon, and the top of the canyon is also higher than where the river enters the canyon. There is no possible way the Colorado River made Grand Canyon. Rivers don't flow uphill. They would have had to flow uphill for millions of years to cut the groove deep enough to flow downhill. They simply don't do that. This geologic column is on display at many universities in almost every earth science textbook. This is really the way this is their Bible. This is their paradigm, their worldview. Everything's interpreted based upon this geologic column. I was speaking in South Dakota, and I went to the School of Mines where they have the large dinosaur display there. And the guide was showing us around, and he said, now ladies and gentlemen, these rock layers over here in the geologic column are about 70 million years old. My daughter was 12. She raised her hand. She said, how do you tell the age of the rock layers? And he said, well, we tell the age of the layers by the types of fossils they contain. They're called index fossils. She said, thank you, sir. We walked around the other side of this dinosaur. We're standing on the other side, and the guide said, now, look, folks, these bones right here are about 100 million years old. My daughter raised her hand again. She said, how do you tell the age of the fossils? He said, well, we tell the age of the fossils by which layer they come from. She said, sir, when we were standing over there, you told me you knew the age of the layers by the fossils, and now you're telling me you know the age of the fossils by the layers. She said, isn't that circular reasoning? I mean, a 12-year-old can figure it out. It is classic circular reasoning. And that's exactly how they tell the age of these fossils and these rock layers. Let's see what the evolutionists themselves say about the geologic column and circular reasoning. Here's a textbook, Glencoe Biology 94 edition, on page 306. The layers of rock can be dated by the types of fossils they contain. You follow that? Very next page. Scientists have determined the relative times of appearance and disappearance of many kinds of organisms from the locations of their fossils in the sedimentary rock layers. They're dating the fossils by the rocks, and on the next page before, they were dating the rocks by the fossils. Here's a quote. The intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. The geologist has never bothered to think of a good reply, feeling the explanations are not worth the trouble as long as the work brings results. American Journal of Science, 1976. You can check that out for yourself. Ever since William Smith at the beginning of the 19th century, fossils have been and still are the best and most accurate method of dating and correlating the rocks in which they occur. Apart from very modern examples, which really are archaeology, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used to date fossils. They don't date those fossils by carbon dating, potassium-argon dating, rubidium-strontium dating, lead-208, lead-206, uranium-235, uranium-238. They date them by the position they're found in the rock layers. Paleontologists cannot operate this way. There is no simple way to look at a fossil and say how old it is unless you know the age of the rocks it comes from. And this poses something of a problem. If we date the rock by their fossils, how can we then turn around and talk about patterns of evolutionary change through time in the fossil record? Niles Eldridge, American Museum of Natural History, one of the biggest evolutionists there is. The rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks more accurately. Stratigraphy cannot avoid this kind of reasoning if it insists on using only temporal concepts, because circularity is inherent in the derivation of time scales. American Journal of Science again. Circular reasoning is what the evolutionary scale is based on. The charge of circular reasoning in stratigraphy can be handled in several ways. It can be ignored as not the proper concern of the public. In other words, it's none of your business. It can be denied by calling down the law of evolution. It can be admitted as a common practice, or it can be avoided by pragmatic reasoning. It ought to be admitted as a common practice. It's all based on circular reasoning. Are the authorities maintaining on the one hand that evolution is documented by geology, and on the other that geology is documented by evolution? Isn't this a circular argument? Biologists, help. Good name for the article. They need some help. It's all based on circular reasoning, folks. It cannot be denied that from a strictly philosophical standpoint, geologists are here arguing in a circle. The success of organisms has been determined by a study of their remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the remains of the organisms they contain. That's how it's done, folks. Encyclopedia Britannica. These aren't creationist publications. This geologic column contains all sorts of different rock layers. We have limestone, sandstone, conglomerate, shale, etc. And they're scattered all through there. For instance, here we have limestone, limestone, limestone. If I handed a geologist a piece of limestone and said, how old is it? There is only one possible way he could tell the age of the limestone. I mean, how do you tell the difference between 100 million year old Jurassic limestone and 600 million year old Cambrian limestone? It's limestone, and it's found all through the geologic column. How do you tell the age of this limestone? There's only one way it can be done, by the index fossils. They're dating the rocks by the fossils. So if they say they have found the geologic column in 26 locations, what she really means is they have found certain fossils in those 26 locations. That's how it was determined. And I would say in a worldwide flood in the days of Noah, you would find all sorts of fossils in all sorts of places. Radiometric dating would not have been feasible if the geologic column had not been erected first. Well, what on earth do you mean by that, Mr. O'Rourke? You can't date things by radiometric dating unless you know the approximate age they come from. Go to any laboratory where they do carbon dating. I challenge you to do this. Take in a sample and ask them, would you please carbon date this? Get something like charcoal that's easier to carbon date, and they will make you fill out several pages of papers telling where did you find it, what fossils were associated with it, how old do you think it is. Look, carbon dating is not a blind test. They go into this very primed looking for a particular age, which is why the frozen dinosaur bones that were found in Antarctica were not carbon dated. They would have given some number, much less than the 70 million they're looking for. They'll say, well, it's because carbon dating only goes to 50,000 years. Well, we'll talk more about that later. I'll show you how carbon dating really works if you'd like to know. Here's an index fossil from a textbook. It says a trilobite is an index fossil. If you find a trilobite in the rock layer was probably formed 500 million years ago. They date the layers by the fossils. That's how it's done universally. All this happened in the early 1800s for lots of political and scientific reasons, I'm sure. But we can talk about the politics behind it if you like. But here's a petrified fossil of a human shoe print where a man stepped on a trilobite. William Meister found it in 1968. This is from Reader's Digest, Mysteries of Then Explained, page 38. Another view of it, showing the trilobite larger than that. It's all based on index fossils. Let me see here. If you took this rock to any university and said, how old is this rock? They would say, oh, this is easy. This contains an index fossil. It's called a graptolite. And the graptolite is the index fossil for 410 million year old rock. It is the New York State fossil. Look it up in the encyclopedia, graptolites.